Life after the collapse will not be great, and that should go without saying, but many of you preppers all across America leave comments on my posts that make me wonder if you really understand this. You're buying all kinds of prepper gear, you're storing all kinds of canned goods, you're arming yourself to the teeth, posing questions like, can it just happen already? You want SHTF, you seem to want Teotwalkie, you want a second civil war. What's up, my preppers? In this video, we're going to explore this phenomenon of preppers who are itching for the end of days, and using some historical examples, we're going to explore what life really might be like after a collapse. I don't know what it is that makes some people think that life after the collapse will be something to look forward to, that it'll be fun, but maybe it's fiction that makes us think this, because I mean, it would be understandable if that's the case, because I know when I watch Mad Max, I always imagine I'm the one with the gasoline. Or if I'm watching The Walking Dead, I'm one of the survivors. Not the more likely scenario, which is you'd be the dead one, or in the case of The Walking Dead, the undead. But why do we think that way? Well, studies have shown that most of us are wired with what's called optimism bias. And studies by people like Tali Sharot, a neuroscientist, she's indicated that actually 80% of us are wired with optimism bias. That we think somehow good things will happen to us even in dire circumstances. Turns out it's an evolutionary adaptation. Being optimistic can make individuals more likely to take risks and venture into the unknown, which in the past could have led to finding new resources or habitats. But in the modern world, and especially in the context of SHTF, this bias can lead to a dangerous underestimation of the realities. So we underestimate the risks. We picture ourselves as the exception to the norm, the survivor, the hero, and that can be dangerous. There's also a moral problem here, right? Because wishing for the collapse means wishing for suffering on a grand scale. It means wishing for children to go hungry, for seniors to suffer from the lack of medical care, for communities to be torn apart, and countless lives lost. It's not just about the romanticized, rugged survivor fighting against all odds. It's about the innocent mother who can't find medicine for her sick child, or the elderly man who's left cold and alone. Wishing for that kind of collapse means wishing for great harm on many people, and it's something that you should really reflect upon. True preparedness stems from a community spirit. It goes beyond personal safety to ensuring that our neighbors, friends, and community members are also protected. The essence of prepping is hoping that you never have to use those preparations, but being ready if the time comes. Wishing for a collapse puts personal thrill over the welfare of the community, and it doesn't really align with the true ethos of preparedness. So let's consider 5 harsh realities that those of you wishing for a collapse are probably not thinking about. 1. Loss of life. When discussing a large-scale societal collapse, this is probably the most profound, the most somber things we'd have to consider. Most prepping discussions, forums, focus on the best type of gear to buy, how you store rice long-term, that sort of thing, without even thinking about the larger picture of dealing with so much death. And really a collapse could mean you're dead, or even worse, your spouse or your children are dead. And for those of you who are wishing for a second civil war, let's look at the first Civil War to provide some context on how things could play out. The American Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865, remains the deadliest conflict in U.S. history in terms of American lives lost. Current estimates suggest that anywhere between 620,000 and 750,000 soldiers died as a result of the war, with many more civilians losing their lives indirectly due to conflict-related consequences like disease and malnutrition. To provide perspective, the U.S. population in 1860 was approximately 31.4 million. If we take the higher estimate of 750,000 deaths, that's almost 2.4% of the population. Transposing this percentage to the current U.S. population, estimated at over 330 million, a conflict with a similar fatality rate would result in nearly 8 million American lives lost. If you're wishing for a civil war, it's because you've never been in a war before. No one in their right mind is going to wish for that. So as we prepare, it's important to be mindful of the human cost of social upheaval. And it underscores the importance of community, cooperation, and prevention in all prepper strategies. Number 2, the severe shortage of critical supplies and resources. Beyond just the loss of life, if you're one of the initial survivors, you have the next challenge of dealing with a severe shortage of critical supplies. These images of these grand stocked bunkers, these stocked pantries, plenty of SHTF supplies that are glamorized in social media and in prepper YouTube channels. And if I'm being honest, in my own, they're an oversimplification of what we would face. To understand this better, let's go back to the Civil War. Even with a lesser population and an abundance of agricultural resources, blockades and disrupted supply chains led to acute shortages. For instance, salt, an indispensable preservative before the advent of refrigeration, became a rare commodity in the South, often more valuable than gold. This shortage saw the prices of essential goods surge dramatically. A barrel of flour that cost $6 before the war escalated to an astonishing $275 during its peak. Another chilling reminder is the Nazi siege of Leningrad. The blockade resulted in dire food shortages, pushing residents to extremes like consuming wallpaper paste, leather, and in the most harrowing instances, resorting to cannibalism. Translating those historical examples to today's world is even more sobering. Our modern economies rely on just-in-time delivery. Products arrive just in time to be consumed or purchased by the consumer. And while that's really efficient, it's also very fragile. Disruption in that supply chain can lead to immediate shortages. Supermarket shelves could be barren within days, if not hours. Even locally produced food might become inaccessible with transportation breakdowns. Consequently, many could face the grim reality of skipped meals, malnutrition, and weakened immunity. The intricate web of modern healthcare, dependent on consistent supplies and electricity, would be in jeopardy. Essential medications like insulin or antibiotics could be out of reach. Hospitals, already strained, could face crippling shortages, rendering even the basic medical care procedures perilous. Worse still, without clean water and sanitation, there would be an outbreak in diseases like cholera or dysentery. And without the ability to clean yourself as supplies dwindled, or for everyone else as well, skin diseases would become a problem, and infections as well. This scarcity sets off a vicious cycle. Malnutrition would weaken your immune system, making you even more prone to acquiring diseases, and the hospital is not going to be there in order to take care of you or your loved ones, leading to suffering and even death. This would be a harsh reality in a post-apocalyptic world. Suffering would be relentless. Number 3 would be a breakdown in law and order. Modern society relies upon institutions, courts, rules, laws, and mutual respect, so that if we go out and about, we know that we are relatively safe and that we will be treated fairly, mutually fairly. Okay? I respect you, you respect me. If somebody breaks the law, there are consequences. This is a system that becomes very fragile in times of chaos. When a society collapses, one of the most immediate and profound repercussions is the breakdown in law and order. And you'll see this even in times of minor crisis. Riots, for example, store owners that go to the tops of their buildings and secure their goods and their livelihood with AK-47s. And history has plenty of examples when the falls of great civilizations has led to an immediate rise in crime and criminal activity. And once you get beyond a situation like a riot into something more widespread, a country collapsing onto itself, a civil war, if you will, it's a serious problem that I don't think many people are really considering. Sure, you're setting up your defenses. Sure, you've got your pew-pew. You've got some driveway alarms to alert you of intruders, but imagine living in that situation in your home in fear constantly that somebody could be breaking in and causing you harm. Post-World War II Europe, particularly in cities that bore the brunt of the conflict, witnessed a marked increase in theft, black markets, and violence. Infrastructure was destroyed, policing was minimal, and desperation drove individuals to acts they might have previously deemed unthinkable. Similarly, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, while many were lauded for their resilience and community spirit, there was also an undeniable surge in crime rates. Bank robberies, thefts, and even organized crime found fertile ground in the economic desperation of the era. In our modern era, the effects would be even more pronounced with our dense population centers and complex urban environments. We'd likely see vigilantism. In the absence of formal law enforcement, individuals or groups might take the law into their own hands, leading to unchecked and often brutal justice. Increase in criminal activity. Desperation could push many towards theft, looting, or worse. Property crimes would likely skyrocket, and personal safety could be a constant risk. Exploitation. Vulnerable groups, including women, children, and the elderly, and marginalized communities, might face higher risk of exploitation or harm. Formation of warlord-like entities. Just as we've seen in failed states in contemporary times, power vacuums can lead to the rise of warlord-like figures or groups who wield the power through force, further destabilizing regions. Prison breakouts. A potential overlooked aspect could be the security of prisons. Without proper oversight, there's a possibility of mass prison breakouts, releasing a multitude of criminals back into society. Distrust among communities. Trust, a fundamental social contract, would erode. Neighbors could become suspicious of one another, and community cohesion could disintegrate. This underscores the importance of avoiding societal breakdown in the first place and building resilient communities, people that help one another. Number 4 would be mental health challenges. After societal collapse, you're not just going to face physical stress, but you're going to face mental stress as well. You're going to face serious mental and emotional burdens. Beyond the immediate stress of daily survival, you're also going to have the mental burden of watching the suffering and potential loss of life of loved ones, and that can leave serious psychological scars. One of the understated challenges of a societal collapse in the modern era would be the breakdown of communication systems. We have grown accustomed to instant communication, being able to check in on friends and family with a simple message or call. In the wake of a collapse, those communication lines would be severed. The anxiety of not knowing the fate of distant loved ones, unable to ascertain their well-being, would be an immense emotional weight to bear. Historical events have shown the severe mental toll of crises. During the World Wars, many soldiers came home with shell shock, now identified as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Those who survived significant disasters, whether man-made or natural, often deal with anxiety, depression, and PTSD for extended periods. In a post-collapse scenario, a widespread emergence of PTSD would likely affect not just those on the front lines, but the broader populace. One of the most agonizing experiences would be watching loved ones suffer, whether from illness, hunger, or violence. The emotional pain of seeing a family member or close friend in distress, coupled with feelings of helplessness, can significantly intensify feelings of grief, guilt, and trauma. The fifth and final reality is that you might not like the new world. Optimism bias leads us to think that a post-collapse society might be a clean slate, a new beginning, a chance to build the world better than it was before. But again, history shows us plenty of examples where people thought that, and what happened was much, much worse. A prominent example can be drawn from the Iranian Revolution of 1979. While the revolutionaries sought to overthrow a monarchy they perceived as corrupt and oppressive, the subsequent establishment of the Islamic Republic introduced a strict interpretation of religious governance. The personal freedoms that many had enjoyed, especially women's rights and cultural openness, were heavily curtailed. Many who had initially supported the revolution soon found themselves living under conditions they hadn't anticipated and yearned for the past freedoms. The Russian Revolution provides another illuminating case. The overthrow of the Tsarist regime in 1970 was fueled by a desire for greater equality and an end to imperial oppression. However, the ensuing civil war, followed by the establishment of the Soviet Union, resulted in the rise of an authoritarian regime that, under Stalin, would be responsible for purges, famines, and a reign of terror that affected millions. In Africa, the decolonization movements of the 20th century brought about immense hope for self-governance and prosperity. Yet in some nations, the departure of colonial powers led to power vacuums, dictatorships, and civil wars. Countries like Zimbabwe, which had once been seen as promising new nations post-independence, faced economic collapse and political repression under leaders like Robert Mugabe. In all of those cases, the desire for change was real and deeply felt, but it speaks to the unpredictability of what happens in societal collapse. The new systems and structures that emerge post-collapse may not cater to the dreams and desires and wishes of the civilization. Often they don't. So if you're wishing for a civil war or a collapse or a doomsday, know that you might not really get what it is you wished for. So the idea of a societal collapse is not one to be taken lightly. It's not an escape from the present. It's a descent into harsh realities and an uncertain future. Whether it's a profound loss of life, scarcity of resources, breakdown of law and order, mounting mental health challenges, or a new world that is much worse than the old. I encourage all of you to prepare for the worst, but always hope for the best. If you found this information helpful, please support me as I support you. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. This is a community. Stay safe, stay vigilant.